I was coming across to my office to do a photo shoot, thinking and anticipating one of the best days of my life. I was certainly one of the happiest I'd been, and unfortunately I was in with my passenger, terrible car crash. We both had serious injuries, mine of which was literally a career-threatening injury because I broke my arm completely in half in the upper humerus. And obviously you need your arm in anything you do, but being a facial therapist and at that time a massage therapist, the impact was enormous, and especially on a new business. I wasn't only dealing with the worry of the business, there was the physical pain, which I had never experienced anything like that in the whole of my life, and I'm the mother of two boys. And also the mental aspect, and what the pain in turn, how it affected me mentally.
How did it affect you mentally?
I'm always a glass is half full type of person, and the biggest impact for me was I found the pain unbearable, because unfortunately, due to sensitivities, the medical profession could never get my pain relief right. I was in bed for 4 months, which never been in bed for that long, I don't think ever, even as a baby, my mother said. So that was incredibly difficult. I had to get over the physical incapacity and be going from a very, very independent woman to a totally dependent one, which I found awful. And also, I have to confess, I felt so unwell. And part of my brain kept telling me, well, it's a broken arm, while you're feeling so ill. But obviously, there were serious impact injuries. I had been knocked unconscious in the accident, so there was a lot going on that I really couldn't process. But my biggest thought at that time, I was so angry. Very, very angry. I think because I was so happy, thought I knew which direction I was going, and obviously you never foresee these things, and I certainly didn't foresee that. And I think the thing I would say to anyone is I still haven't worked out what comes first, patience or acceptance. I think once I'd found that tool, I did start to improve, but it took a great deal of time. I was extremely focused and good when I was going through rehabilitation. So when I was going through finally having the cast taken off after 14 weeks, that was an enormous step. But again, me being me, I kept thinking, oh, I'll be all right in about 6 weeks after that. Although I'd been working with bones 35 years, all my working life, I still thought that I could just literally pick up the pieces and start again. So the biggest shock, although I knew it, I didn't want to accept it. When the cast came off, the arm was still firmly wedged across my body. And so I had weeks and months of physio and rehabilitation. The pain again was excruciating, but I was so goal fixated, which I have been like all my life. While I was going through that and making small inroads every day, I could manage to do a button, I could actually keep my arm down by my side for a few minutes. I didn't notice or feel I was in any way depressed. It was when that finished and the therapist and my GP said to me, well, that's it, this is what you've got to work with. And it meant that I had to let go of a very, very significant part of my job, which was the massage therapy, that side of things that I'd worked for all my life. I just found that absolutely awful. It was a moment of grief, intense anger, and I just couldn't work out the past coping mechanisms I'd always had, because I certainly haven't had an easy life like anybody else. You have your peaks and troughs. And in the past, my coping mechanisms had always been the work, the joy of the work, and being so intimately involved with my clients. Obviously, you always hear of something every day that brings you up short, what they're coping with, and you think, oh gosh, mine is nothing. I had none of that. I couldn't get myself to have a nice hot bath. I couldn't have my hair done. All of these things may sound superficial, but for me as a woman, working in this industry isn't about beauty or vanity. It's about how you're facing the world, and it's just good housekeeping. And I couldn't have my hair cut because hairdressers use that at your shoulders and your ears as a level. Not being able to get out of bed, and then when I could do those things, I still wasn't back in my life where it had been before. I had to make a new life, and also my husband had a new wife to deal with. He'd been in the Navy, so I was fearfully independent. I'd always worked, always earned my own money, was very positive, not at all. He had his areas of life. He enjoyed his running. He's a very serious runner. And I had mine, and we both embraced that. We didn't have to be joined at the hip. And suddenly the poor man had to have a mobile phone because he had this wife that was, where are you? When are you coming back? Don't leave me, which was something both of us had to work our way through. And I certainly didn't recognise that woman. I still don't recognise her, and she took me a long time to quieten her down and for the new me to come through. And there were lots of bad days. I really want to get that across to people. What you're seeing now before the camera has taken years and months. You do have bad days, and I'm probably sure going to have a few more bad days, but it gets better. And I think coping with this, what I've learned was that it's all right to be angry, and that was the problem I faced, because a lot of people would come out with that old chestnut. They'd pat me on the shoulder, usually the bad one, and say, just be positive. And to be honest with you, I just wanted to take a swing at them. If my arm hadn't been so poorly, I would have done. Yes. And I'm not an aggressive person, but it sounded so trite, and that wasn't the way I could cope with things. And eventually I had great support, not only from the family, but my GP, and I also saw a specialist in post-traumatic stress disorder, which apparently I was so typical. I fought kicking and screaming not to go. I kept saying, I haven't got that, that's for poor soldiers. And again, people would say to me, you know, that poor soldier that you see before the camera with his legs missing and his arms missing, or her arms missing. And yes, I've still got my arm, but how long did it take for those poor guys to be in front of the camera? There are many things that go on before you run a marathon again. And I didn't want to see this chap because I just felt that I was a fraud. I'd been in a car accident. But the day I walked into his office, I can honestly say this, was the day I got better. Because he looked at me, and I'd written out, I had to do an extensive form questionnaire for him, which he'd studied. He'd obviously compared notes with my GP, who'd been fantastic. And he just said, how angry are you? And I just burst into tears, because other than my husband, he was the only person that allowed me to say, I am so angry.
He'd recognised that straight away.
And he recognised it straight away, and he said to me, that's all right, that's absolutely fine, of course you are. You know, you were having time of your life, very interesting life, new side of your career launching. You'd worked very hard to get to that point, because I'd always wanted my own professional product range. And it was the recession that got me to that point, because no manufacturer would look at me because I was so tiny. And here I was given this opportunity, and only 9 months in, the carpet was whipped from under my feet. Yes. So there was a lot of anger, and I did express to him that it was the fact that under normal circumstances, I probably would have just jumped out the car, called the chap an idiot, shaken his hand, said that's absolutely fine, driven away, got over it. But I was trapped in the car with my passenger. I felt so guilty about my little passenger, because she was only 19. She was doing me a favour. And there she was. She set out on a lovely day, and there she was strapped to a gurney, being lifted off to hospital because they thought she'd broken her neck. So I had guilt and anger.
So a whole wealth of emotions just kind of suppressed until you were given permission to release them.
Yes.
Really.
And I just burst into tears because other people, again, sort of trying to help you, kept saying, well, you won't get well unless you forgive. I mean, it wasn't about forgive. Of course, it was an accident. These things happen. We all know that. But that wasn't. It was so hard. And I just wanted people to recognise how difficult and how bad it was for us all. My family were brilliant. You know, our whole world was turned upside down, and as I say, my hardest thing to come to terms with was that I wasn't the person I thought I was. But seeing this wonderful man, he said, acknowledging my anger was a huge step, but the second step was that he said to me, why are you any different to that soldier? Because I kept saying, I shouldn't be here, I'm a fraud and I haven't got it, and apparently that's the number one thing with post-traumatic disorder, you're a denier. And he said, just because you were not facing a gun, you still face death. And he'd asked me on the questionnaire, what were your thoughts? Can you remember your thoughts? Because I was knocked out. And I didn't expect, I was so surprised when I came round, I actually did prepare. I thought, this is it. And I just remember saying to my passenger, don't worry, it will be quick and I'm here. And I just squeezed her hand and thought, well, this is it. I wasn't expecting to come round. And he said to me, because you weren't expecting to come round, my brain at that point, and plus there was a brain injury that through being knocked unconscious, I didn't know how to live. And that's what I had to learn to do again. I had to learn to accept what had happened. I had to learn the patience to deal with what happened. But his acknowledgement of that and saying it was okay to be angry and it was okay that it was just as bad as everybody else's, it just helped enormously. I came out of there, as I say, and I think that was the start of my mental recovery.
And you learning to live again.
And learning to live again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
If there's one thing I'd really like to share with everybody, if this experience can help without sounding Pollyanna, is that just remember everyone's depression is totally unique to them, and what works for you, it may not work for someone else.